Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Robert Kennedy III, and we're going to be talking about how to talk about storytelling, but what Robert is going to be talking about, because sometimes storytelling can be very fluffy. And people think about Disney, and I've read loads of books which talk about the way that Disney writes stories, and it's pretty useless when it comes to if you're a small business owner. Robert's got a couple of frameworks that we're going to talk about. So, Robert, where can people find you?
You can find me at robertkennedy3.me. But before we do that, we're on a show, and this, as a speaker, as a presenter, as a facilitator, we like to enter the stage a little bit here. So I want you to do me a favor. Just say, ladies and gentlemen, introducing Robert Kennedy III.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Robert Kennedy III.
Yeah. All right, cool. That is my theme song, my theme music, and my stage entry, my friend. How about that?
That's amazing. No one has ever done that on this podcast. You are and you know, dancing bears, all kinds of stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So yes, Robert Kennedy III, RK3. You can find me at robertkennedy3.me. How about that?
That's fantastic, and I know that people can find you because I've searched for you and found you. You're pretty. As long as you use the Robert Kennedy III or Robert Kennedy III, they will find you.
Yeah, they will, and I've been very intentional about that from a branding perspective, simply because there's a lot of Robert Kennedys and a few famous ones, and so I want to make sure that I stand out just a little bit.
Yes. So, you in your world, you do a lot around communication, storytelling. You run your own podcast. Just before we came on the show, you were talking about the event that you're running around podcasting. So this is very much about your subject area.
Yeah.
Why is this so important, Robert? Why do we need to be thinking about this for the average person in the street? Having dancing bears and stuff like that. Why do we need this?
Well, communication is the bedrock of society, right? And when we think about it, nearly everything that we're involved in, good and bad, comes back to communication in some ways. If you are in a relationship and the relationship goes south, it's probably because of communication. If it does well, it's probably because of communication. We've had wars that have started because of communication. If you think about even in World War II, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki scenario, there are a lot of different things that are involved in that, but there was a communication element to that as well. And that there's a story that I share in one of my presentations or my workshops about it. So there are just so many different things. We look at all of the different political environments, all of the different challenges that we have. Communication is central. Winston Churchill, in the way that he drove his people to and inspired them, he was a master communicator, right? And so if you are not putting communication at the top of your list to learn or to create some skill set around, you're going to be behind everyone else. So I believe it's an essential skill, not a soft skill.
And even more in an AI world. I mean, we're social animals, aren't we? And so what we need, the soft skill of communication or conversation, is important, even in the digital world, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you want to stand out, as just what you said, because there's AI, because we have so many options, because there's so many distractions. How do you stand out? What do you need to do with your communication in order to stand out? And so I like to say communication is transfers information, but connection creates transformation. And so you want to create connections with people, not just share information or share data. How can you get them to move from where they are now to someplace different?
And I think it was Keith Keller in Melbourne, Australia, that connected us.
Yeah.
He's a big communicator and a big connector.
Love
and
it.
he recommends a lot of people on to come on my podcast, and here we are.
Yes, sir.
So it's one of those things where communication and connection are great ways of meeting new people. Now, it doesn't mean
Absolutely.
that Tim or Robert are going to sell or buy anything, but the fact
Right.
of the matter is, it's another person in your network, another person that you know, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. 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 I believe we talk about 6 degrees of separation all the time. And the more that we can expand our networks and step outside of our own little world, our own immediate space, the more that we see that there's so many great people, so many great ideas that are around. And if we expose ourselves to those, we have a much better shot of creating the success that we desire.
So you run a podcast which is called Speak Up and Sell More.
Yes.
Good, I got my notes are right. Um, so where is it, or why is it that conversations, communication, is create? Why does that create us more sales?
So I was in my living room in the state of Massachusetts when I lived there, and my doorbell rang. I go to the door and I look out the window, and there is a gentleman in the driveway, and he's got a display board. And on that display board, there are these squares, these little swatches. I couldn't see clearly what they were from inside. So I open the door and I go outside. And he says to me, "Hey, my name's Mark. I'm selling carpet. I've got these different types of carpet. I've got Berber, I've got low pile, mid pile, high pile, Gomer pile. I've got all the piles. Can you touch it?" And so I touched it. And then I did that for about a minute or and a half with him. And then after about that minute and a half, I opened my door and showed him the inside of my house, which was all hardwood. And so he said, "Oh, you've got hardwood." And then he walked away. Right? So he communicated. He shared some information with me. I shared some information with him. He looked and then he ran away. If he took the time to connect, if he took the time to really understand a little bit more about me, he could have had a sale. So here's how he could have done that. He
Yeah.
could have come across the street and said, "Hey, I was just across the street at your neighbor Judy." Connection point number one, right? Familiarity. And I was talking to her, and Judy said, I asked her how she felt about her oil bill. And Judy said, "Oh my gosh, I hate my oil bill. I feel like it's so ridiculously expensive." So I came across the street here to your house, and I couldn't help but notice that you have the same oil tank out front and out of front of your house that Judy has in front of hers. So maybe you're kind of having the same experience around your heating and your oil. And I would have responded, "Yeah, wow, yeah, that's crazy. It's ridiculous. We're spending $500-600 a month." And he could have then said, "Well, you know what? I know that a lot of the houses in this area have hardwood as the flooring. But what if I told you that there was a way that you could save $300 per month on your heating bill? Would you listen?"
Mm.
Of course I'm going to listen.
You'd say, I
I'm
know you're
already
going to sell
riled
me
up.
something, but you need to tell me, give me the pitch.
Yeah, I'm already riled up. Yeah, because he's created a connection. He's tapped into a challenge. He's tapped into a problem that I have. He's tapped into an emotion that I've already experienced, and that he's just triggered that emotion by asking me the question. And so now I'm ready. I'm open. My doors are wide open for him to present me a solution to this challenge that I've articulated. And so if I am able to speak and connect, then yeah, that leads to more sales. And the secret behind that is understanding or eliciting the challenge or the problem or the experience that your audience is having.
Mm. And I love, Robert, how you basically told a story there.
Yeah.
Because I've had people coming on here that to talk about storytelling, and then I've actually had complaints because people have said they're supposed to be a storytelling expert, but they never told a story. And I'd go, "Yeah, I know." And I said, "You did notice I asked them these questions because I was trying to elicit some sort of
Yeah.
story out of them, but they just kept going on with facts." So in terms of this storytelling framework, you've just come across with a beautiful story, and so how can me as a startup or a small business, how can we tell simple stories like that without the Disney framework?
Yeah. Well, the issue for a lot of people is that they figure that in order to tell stories, they have to have these grandiose experiences, these traumatic challenges that they've walked through. I had a car accident. I was born with only one arm, and those are tragic circumstances. Or I don't even want to say tragic because there are people that live amazing lives that have had those circumstances happen to them. But the truth is, we don't have to have these big experiences. We just need to tap into the common experiences. What are some common experiences? Oh, okay. Everybody's taken a test at some point. Everybody has gone through an experience where you had to learn a new skill. Maybe you had to get your driver's license. Maybe you had to learn how to ride a moped, or you had to get the license for that. Or maybe it was the time that you rode a bicycle and you fell off of that. Those are common experiences. And we
And
can
they're all
all tap into
experiences where we've probably had feelings inside
it. Yeah,
where
absolutely.
it's sort of like tied up in knots.
Absolutely. And it's easy to tap into those. And so we've got to get used to, or we've got to get familiar with tapping into those. There's a great book by Matthew Dix called Storyworthy. And in that book, Matthew Dix talks about an exercise that he does every single day. And at the end of the day, what he does is he sits and he writes down 5 things that happened that day. It doesn't matter what it is. I went to the gas station, I put gas in the car, etc. As he writes down those 5 things, he draws a line, and on the right side, he then says, "Okay, what are the lessons that I've learned from those experiences, or what is a takeaway from those experiences?" What he's doing is he's creating a story bank. He's creating a story vault. And the more that you do that, the easier it becomes to pull from that story vault. The reason why a lot of us can't pull out stories is because we don't capture them. And so now you get into a moment where a story could make a difference, but you don't have one that you can grab really quickly because you haven't gotten into the practice of capturing them. So, homework for the listeners: make sure that you take on that practice of capturing stories so that you can leverage them as you need. I don't think I answered your question though, Tim. You asked something else. Go ahead and repeat the question
You
for
came
me.
up with story banks, Robert, which is
Yes.
what a fantastic suggestion to people, something that they can all
Yeah.
take away. And it's about how do we come up with those. So first and foremost,
Yeah.
if we start putting in the effort of those story banks, then we've got stories to pull upon. But in
Yeah.
terms of your how do we come up with, so what's your structure and framework where we can come up with a very simple, we're at a networking meeting, we're on a
Yeah.
podcast, how can we get like a snappy story?
Fantastic. So I joined Toastmasters some years ago, and Toastmasters has this thing called table topics, where they give you a topic, you walk up, you have no idea what it is, and they tell you to speak about it for 1 minute. And it's called extemporaneous practice. So how do you pull an idea out of your brain to speak about something for a minute, 60 seconds without any break? So I came up with an activity or a framework that I would follow. And as I hear any topic, I immediately jump to, okay, what is the one takeaway that I want the audience to have as I talk about this? So I've got a framework that I call EASE, EASE: energy, ask, story, explain. All right. So I create it backwards, but I deliver it forwards.
So that's, go through that again. EASE is energy,
Energy, ask,
ask,
story,
story,
explain.
explain.
Right. So if any topic is given to me, so for example, give me a topic, Tim, just random, anything.
Trees.
Trees. Okay. So in my mind, I now think, okay, what do I want you to know about trees? And I might just say, okay, trees, I want you to know that trees provide oxygen. Okay. Is there a story that I can tell you about trees providing oxygen? Okay. So my mind goes to, okay, yeah, I learned about that when I was in second grade. My teacher was telling us about photosynthesis and that process. Okay. Is there a question that I can ask about that story or that topic? Okay. The question that I can ask is, what does, oh, actually, that's not a good question. What would it be like if you couldn't breathe?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what's the energy that I want to bring to that? I want to have people be reflective or thoughtful. I could have people be enthusiastic or energetic, but that's not the energy that I want to bring. Reflection to this. So now I can speak. So I stand up in front of the audience and I say, what would it be like if you woke up one morning and you just couldn't breathe? So now what happens is the audience, they don't focus on me now. They go into their mind and their
I'm
mind is
sitting here
flipping
going,
through
I
a
can't
mental
breathe.
Rolodex.
I can't breathe.
Yeah, right. Exactly. What does that feel like? Do I want to experience that? Do I not want to experience that? Uh, so their attention is not on me anymore. It's on themselves. So I let them sit in that for just a moment. And then I say, well, you know what? In second grade, I learned that there's this process called photosynthesis. And it's the process where the cells inside of the leaves of plants convert the sun's energy. And, and I walk through all of that. And I say, part of that allows us to breathe. So when people walk around and they're cutting down trees and they're ripping plants out of the ground, and a lot of us walk around or we drive around and we see all these trees being cut down for housing developments, you've got to ask yourself the question, as all these trees are being cut down, is that taking away my ability to breathe? Right? And so I've just come up with a story. I've come up with a point. I've come up with an emotional connection. Now my audience is thinking differently. And I've done that in the span of about 30 seconds.
Yes. And you've made it up on the spot.
Yeah.
Just so everybody knows, we didn't practice this before we went live.
Right. Right. And notice the story that I told, it wasn't a expansive story.
No.
It was, okay, yep, I learned about this in second grade. My teacher said this, and this, and it made me think about this.
So how do you translate that into presentations?
I do the same thing in presentations. I may expand it in that I may tell multiple stories, because I may say, if I have the time, what's the one thing that I want them to walk away with? But underneath that one thing, are there 3 points that I can make? Okay. And then for each of those points, is there a story? Is there an experience that I can share that brings this home or makes this real for my audience? So I'll add a little bit more because I have a little bit more time for preparation, but the idea is still the same. How can I engage them as quickly as possible? And my engaging tactic is by asking that question, because there's a scientific response that we have. Our brains, when we hear a question, is called instinctive elaboration. That's the name of the scientific response theory. And what that means is that when we hear a question, our brains cannot help but answer it. Right? We may not give the answer out of our mouth, but every time we hear a question, our brains go into question, answer, and seek mode. And it starts to walk around our brain banks to find out if there is a connection. Our brains love connections. Our brains love patterns.
Yeah.
And so when the question is asked, okay, how can I make a pattern out of that? Where's the answer? Where's the thing? What's the connection point? And so I do the same thing. My goal is to engage my audience's brain as soon as possible when I present. And so that is one of the tricks or one of the hacks of storytelling. When we think about the question, that question is usually tied to what we call a conflict in your story, right? So I'm not going to ask a yes or no question typically. I'm not going to ask a question like, what's your name? I'm going to ask a question that is tied to a challenge inside of the audience's world, or a challenge that I want them to understand or recognize.
And because quite often what people do when they give presentations is that they think, if I'm going to give you lots of facts, then at some point you're going to go, yes, isn't that, I need to buy your product. Whereas what you're saying is to step back and actually talk stories.
Yep. Yep. And really dig into your audience's world, because I can come in and say, hey, you know what? I've got this great pencil. I went to the store yesterday and I bought this pencil, and this pencil is a pencil that I use with my iPad, and it allows me to draw great pictures on my iPad, and it's got great detail. And I spend 20 minutes talking about this, and the audience is like, "Wait a minute, I don't have an iPad."
Yeah, yes.
Wait a minute, I hate art. I don't even like to draw. Why are we talking about art and a pencil? This has nothing to do with me. What happens when they do that? Pretty quickly, they're like, "Erks, okay, scroll, scroll, scroll. Let me check out. Let me text my mom." So we've got to figure out how to engage our audience. So even in the case where people may not have had an iPad and I still want to sell the pencil, I might still come into the audience and immediately I would say, "How many of you have an iPad?" Okay, cool. People raise their hands. I see about half of them have an iPad and half of them don't. And I would say, well, for those of you that do not have an iPad, what would it be like if you had a device that would allow you to take every idea that you had from your brain and store it immediately? Okay, so now they're thinking, okay, what if there was something else that was an extension of your brain that could allow you to bring those ideas to life visually and then store them forever? Like if water dropped on it, it didn't matter. It was digital. So they don't have an iPad, but now their brains are thinking, and I'm introducing them to something that they might possibly look at in the future to say, okay, yeah, I need to go get this iPad because that pencil is sexy that Robert has. I want to do that. Right? So we've got to figure out how to grab them and how to engage them and bring them from where they are to where, not just where you want them to be, but where they can see themselves being.
Robert, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about storytelling and having simple structure around storytelling. Remind people where they can get hold of you.
You can get in touch with me by going to robertkennedy3.me. All of my socials are there. You can contact me through the email, and anything that you need to get in touch with me is there. robertkennedy3.me.
And if you search for Robert Kennedy III, I can guarantee that you will find Robert. Robert, thank you so much for coming on. An entertaining show. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I love it when someone comes on who says that they're going to do stories and they tell stories.
I love it.
Thanks,
Thank
Robert.
you, my friend.